Hey everybody, Xlex here, coming at you with another Master Duel video. Now this one is going to be just a little bit different from the other ones. This is more of like a, I don't know if I want to call it like a challenge video. It's kind of good a format for it, I think. So rather than a standard like deck profile, this is more to see what kind of a deck I can build within certain constraints. For this video, I have challenged myself to build a deck that only uses rare or normal rarity cards. No super rares, no ultra rares. You know, I figure I've got like everyone I'm sure has like thousands of normal and rare craft points just like hoarded up and you don't know what to do with them. Well, I went ahead and built a deck with them. So let's go ahead and take a look at it here. As you can see, it's True Budget True King is actually what I should have called it. Let's actually, you know what? I like that. I'm going to go ahead and rename it. I'm going to rename this, whoops. There we go, True Budget True King. So yep, as you can see, this deck is actually all just rare cards except for two normal cards, which these are two kind of flex spots anyway, but I'll get to that in a moment. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and start looking at all the cards in the list here. First off, we have Majesty, Maiden, the true Dracocaster. For our monster lineup, we've also got Ignis, the true Dracowarrior, and Dreiath III, the true Dracocavalary General. So these are your main monsters. Well, they're your only monsters, really. You can see we don't even have an extra deck. And really, these are the core of your deck, as you can imagine. So all of these monsters can be tribute summoned by tributing continuous spells and traps instead of monsters. They don't even have to be face up on the field. You can set them face down, and you can still tribute them in order to summon all three of these monsters. Now, they all do something different, but their effects will only trigger when they've been tribute summoned. Majesty Maiden, when she's tribute summoned and your opponent activates a card or effect, you get to add a true Draco or true King monster from your deck to your hand. Most of the time you're going to want to be adding Majesty Maiden herself, another copy. You are able to do that. She does not have that restriction like most searching cards do. And the reason for that is, as you can tell, we're not really running a whole lot of monsters in this deck, and we really need our monsters to keep our engine going. So ideally, we're using Majesty Maidens to search more copies of Majesty Maidens so that we do not run out of steam. Now, if you already have another Majesty Maiden, you could grab like an Ignis or a Dreiath III. It just kind of depends on the situation, but again, most of the time you're going to want to be adding another Majesty Maiden. Next we have Ignis, who is more or less the same as Majesty Maiden, except he either activates or adds a True King or a True Draco continuous spell from the deck. That's going to be either True Draco Heritage or Disciple of the True Dracocavalary. These are fairly important to the deck as they help us draw cards, and drawing is going to be very, very important for this deck as it's really easy for us to run out of steam. And most of the time we lose, that is the reason that we lose, is that we run out of steam. Finally, we have Dreiath III, who's a little bit different from the other two. Rather than adding cards, Dreiath III, while tribute summoned and leaves the field, can summon a true Draco or true King monster from the deck in defense position. Another effect that Dreiath III does have is that it prevents our other True Draco or True King monsters, rather, from being destroyed or targeted by card effects. That's a rather niche application for him that normally doesn't come into play too much. Really, you just want him for the stats and the ability to summon another True King or True Draco monster. Since it does come out in defense mode, you'll typically just want to summon another copy of him. And remember, because our True Draco and True King monsters only get their effects when they are tribute summoned, if you try to grab a Majesty Maiden or an Ignis, you will not be able to add any cards with it. So most of the time, I recommend just grabbing another copy of this. Next up, we've got 3 copies of Dimensional Fissure. Pretty simple, just banishes monsters that are sent to the graveyard. This conflicts with our strategy very slightly, but this is mostly used as a good disruption tool. It's kind of like our version of a floodgate, right, in the rarity. This is about as close to floodgates as you really get. So this is good for disrupting a lot of graveyard-based strategies. It hurts Tri-Brigade cards, it hurts some Drytron cards. It can hurt some virtual world cards. It just can minorly disrupt a lot of the strategies of the major decks. Eldelich, they won't get their Golden Lords, they'll get banished, so that's always nice. Shard of Greed, I almost want to call this a filler spot, but really drawing cards is very important for this deck. As I mentioned, you can run out of steam very easily, so it's very important to be able to continuously draw more cards. Now, this card is very, very slow at drawing you more cards. It takes you 2 turns after you activate it. But at this rarity, we really don't have any more other options for generic draw. We've got True Draco Heritage and Disciples of the True Dracocavalary, True Draco Heritage. So during your main phase, you can draw cards equal to the number of True Draco or True King card types sent to the graveyard, monsters, spells, or traps. Most of the time, you're only going to be drawing one card out for this effect, but even that is helpful enough. And like all True Draco continuous spells and traps, you have the ability to immediately special summon, or not special summon, tribute summon a True Draco or True King monster after the effect resolves. Also, the continuous spell cards will destroy a spell card if they are sent from the field to the graveyard. Note that is not only by tributing them, but by other card effects as well. Disciples of the True Draco is also going to draw us cards. This one does it by shuffling 3 True Draco or True King cards into the graveyard. Typically, games with this deck do go on long. I would call this more of a stun deck. It is not really a combo deck at all. It is pretty much just a stun deck. So this is ideal for continuously refueling us throughout the course of the game. Not only in terms of making sure we don't lose our resources, but also making sure we're still drawing cards. And finally, we've got 3 copies of Forbidden Chalice, just so we have like some amount of monster effect negation. Onto the traps, we've got 3 copies of Torrential Tribute, we've got 3 Compulsory Evacuation Device, we've got 3 Paleozoic Dinomischus. If you're a budget player, you should be familiar with all 4 of these cards. They are all very, very good cards for the rarity. I went over these in my essential cards video, my like cards to craft basically staples video. They're all fairly simple. Torrential destroys all cards when a monster is summoned, Compulsory bounces any monster back to the hand, and Dinomischus banishes a card. The ability to bring itself back is also relevant for tribute summoning as well. We've got 2 copies of the Monarchs Erupt. I haven't really activated this yet, but in theory this is like our version of Skill Drain. It only works though if you have a tribute summoned monster and no cards in the extra deck, and during the end phase it will check for tribute summoned monsters, and if you have none, it'll destroy itself. I'm only using 2 copies because it's a little situational. At the very least, if it's not useful, we can tribute it away to summon one of our monsters, but again, I haven't really gotten it to work just yet. I haven't even really drawn it, to be honest, but it's still a good slot in the deck. Again, I would consider this a bit of a flex spot. If you've got other cards that you think might be better, I could see them adding them here. True King's Return is a very important card for this deck. It is a trap card that lets us special summon True King or True Draco monsters from the graveyard once per turn. So this is how we're going to stay in the game a lot of the time. We're going to continuously be recurring 1 or 2 copies of True Draco monsters, ideally Dreiath III. We can keep bringing him back in defense total 2000 defense, which our opponent should have a hard time running over. And finally, the last card, we've got True Draco Apocalypse, which can you can send another True Draco or True King card that you control to the graveyard, and permanently, even if this card leaves the field, have the attack and defense of all face-up monsters your opponent controls. This doesn't look like that big of an effect on paper, but in practice, it can completely shut down your opponent's boards, leaving them unable to get over like Dreiath's 2800 defense, or even any of these monsters' attack points, really. Also, the True King trap cards and True Draco trap cards, when they are sent from these spell traps under the graveyard, they destroy a monster, which is a very, very handy disruption tool, as there are often times that the opponent has a monster too big for us to run over. And yeah, I mean, this is the deck. Now, I'm going to show a few games that I played in Platinum 1 with this deck. Would I recommend using this deck in Platinum 1, like, legitimately? No. Honestly, not really. I think this deck is kind of fun in lower ranks. I could see getting to Platinum with this deck. I could definitely see that happening. Getting to Platinum 1 would definitely be challenging. It's certainly possible, but this deck does have a difficult time keeping up with a lot of the pace of the current meta decks. But that said, it's not impossible. You could still do it. I would actually be extremely impressed if anybody did, but alas. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these replays. I guess we'll go ahead and save the changes. I didn't think I'd made any. Oh, to the name, right. Alright, without further ado, let's go ahead and head over here to the replays. Again, I've just got a few for you, and I will admit that, yep, 2 of them are losses. It was a bit difficult to get wins. I had actually 2 other ones, but it was literally just like my opponent conceding. Either one of was my opponent conceding right away, the other was me activating Dimensional Fissure, and then my opponent conceded, so they really weren't interesting wins at all. But that does happen from time to time. Let's take a look at this game. Even though it was a loss, it was 13 turns, so it was still a very good back and forth duel. And the win I'm actually very eager to show you, because it was a very, very interesting game. Okay, so yeah, you can see this was still when I was using March over Shadow, or not Shadow, Shard of Greed in this deck. I'm going to go ahead and activate my March and then go ahead and tribute summon the Majesty Maiden. We're going to set up our True Draco Apocalypse in the Paleozoic Trap as well. Now, our opponent is going to be playing a Kaiju deck. And you will see that it is actually a pure dedicated Kaiju deck, which I was very impressed with my opponent for. And it was actually a little scary. I'd never played against... I mean, I played Yu-Gi-Oh! While Kaijus were a thing, but I never actually played against, like, a pure Kaiju deck. Like, one that's using, like, the Kaiju counters and all that stuff. So, you know, at this point, I was like, okay, well, this duel does not look very good. But we do get True King's Return, so we can at least recur our Majesty Maiden. We won't obviously be able to get to her effects since she's not being special summoned, but our opponent's going to have their Kaiju capture mission. I am actually going to go ahead and throw this duel on fast forward, to be honest, because both this one and the upcoming one I'm going to show are a bit long, and I think this will be in the best interest, because honestly, there's not really combos that are going to be happening, so there's not a whole lot you're going to be missing if I throw it in fast forward. So yeah, during the end phase, we're going to go ahead and get our monster back. We're going to go ahead and sack her to have our opponent's monster's attack points. This is going to force them to flip it face down with Kaiju capture mission, which they probably would have done anyway, to be fair, but in turn, when they flip summon, now we can Torrential and get rid of their monster. Unfortunately, though, that gives their Kyoto Waterfront enough counters to add. It's funny, so I was reading this in the middle of the game, or rather, yeah, when the effect activated, and I was like, I glossed over it and I saw, once per turn, remove 3 Kaiju counters and add a Kaiju. Got it. And I was like, okay, cool, that's not so bad. This card's not that bad. And then, you know, I saw my opponent, like, keep adding more and more cards, and I was like, wait, what's going on here? And then I realized, like, oh no, Kyoto Waterfront is, it just says if your opponent has, or if this has 3 or more Kaiju counters. It's like, oh crap. My opponent's going to put the Super Anti-Kaiju War Machine Mecha Thunder King, which is one of my favorite card names in Yu-Gi-Oh, by the way, on my field, which is actually going to work to my advantage for a little while here, because for a second they're not going to be able to get over it. Eventually, though, they are going to drop the Gamma Seal, and honestly, this Gamma Seal is pretty much just going to be the end of me. Its effect to remove 2 Kaiju counters from anywhere on the board and negate any effect is very brutal. I never realized just how brutal it was. It's not once per turn, it's not even once per chain. Like, as you can see in this chain, my opponent activated it multiple times. Nuts. The card's nuts. So, I mean, I'm going to try to attack, but obviously my opponent's just going to flip it face down, and, I mean, you know, I've got the Dreiath the Third, but, like, honestly, at this point, there's not a whole lot I can do in the face of these Kaiju monsters. My opponent's even going to link them away for Cross Sheep. I honestly don't really know why. They could have just attacked the next turn with the 250-600. I mean, I guess there's no way they could have known that. This is probably the optimal play. I'm definitely not familiar with pure Kaijus as a deck. So, you know, who knows. I'm going to try to get one last Compulsory in, but obviously my opponent's going to be able to negate it. They're going to hit me with the Cross Sheep and the Gamma Seal. And at this point, you know, I can activate this, they're going to negate it, and I don't have anything else, so I'm just going to have to concede here. But I wanted to show that game because it was at least a good back and forth, and hey, how often do you get to see pure Kaijus? So I'm just going to skip this one. I don't think I even meant to save this duel. This is the one that I'm really excited about. As you can see, it was 20 whole turns, and we ended up coming out on top. We could have activated Final Countdown and won this duel, but we did it with our true Draco cards instead. And actually, now that I say that out loud, I wonder what rarity Final Countdown is in Master Duel. Surely it's got to be like a normal rare card, right? It's funny, I've actually taken Final Countdown decks to tournaments before. I haven't really, you know, had any success with them in the past, but it's something I've done. So we're going to start by sacking our True Draco Apocalypse in order to summon Dreiath the Third. I'm going to throw down a Dinomischus in order to set that up as well. The reason I summon Dreiath the Third is that I've got a pretty monster-heavy hand, but I can just sack away my Dreiath the Third for one of these 2 monsters and try to get another Dreiath the Third onto the field. But my opponent's got called by. At the very least, we're going to be able to get a continuous spell out of it, but that is still, you know, a little annoying. Yeah, let's go ahead and throw this one fast forward. Again, only because it's 20 turns. It's going to be a long one, but it's going to be a good one. So yeah, we're going to get our true Draco heritage here, and we're going to sack it in order to summon our Majesty Maiden. Now we've got both of these monsters. Unfortunately, our opponent does have the Squamata, which since they flip effect, obviously not only the effect itself will destroy our monster, but during the damage check, or rather, it was during our turn, so that's why we didn't get the effect of Majesty Maiden. Never mind, disregard what I was saying. In any case, we're going to get Disciple's effect. We're going to shuffle them back and draw. Let's actually go ahead and throw this at normal speed for a bit. I changed my mind. Let's do it fast forward. Sorry, I know that's drawing. Anyway, yep, no, our opponent's going to flip the Shaddoll Hedgehog. They're going to add the Fusion, and now they're going to finally start to be able to get their plays off. I do manage to add with the Majesty Maiden at least, so, you know, we're not completely screwed. But we've also got the Dinomischus and the Torrential. I'm not, like, super concerned here, to be honest, especially because this, Apocalypse? Shaddoll A is yeah, it's not that much of a threat here. Now, since my opponent did play the Magical Meltdown, I'm going to Torrential when they summon the Alistair, because when they summon the Fusion monster off of Invocation, I'm not going to be able to respond with Torrential. I am going to be able to get rid of the monster with Dinomischus, sure, but, you know, I still need to be able to get rid of the rest of my opponent's board as well. Yep, and as I said earlier, we're going to go ahead and banish. Fortunately, our opponent does not have a trap card in their hand, so they cannot negate our Dinomischus. They are going to get to add an Alistair, but it's not that big of a deal. Now here we actually managed to resolve a Shard of Greed. Unfortunately, we redrew our other Shard of Greed for turn. I would have definitely preferred this to be a more live card, but, you know, beggars can't be choosers. Since our opponent Shaddoll Schismed, we are going to be able to get our Dinomischus summoned. That's always handy. I'm going to tribute my spell in order to get rid of theirs. As remember, the continuous spell cards, when tributed or just sent from the field spell traps onto the grave for any reason, they destroy a spell or trap card. I definitely don't want my opponent to get more fusion summons, although with Alistair, they're going to be able to do so with Invocation anyway, so really, it wasn't, you know, it probably wasn't that big of a deal, but it was still a nice hit, I think. So here our opponent's going to get the Secure Guard Nut, and yep, they're just going to get the Raijin. So at this point, you know, it's like, I'm a little hesitant about whether I'm going to win this duel or not, but I do at least have the Raijin's big defense points I can throw in defense mode there. We do manage to peel a Disciples off the top, so we do get at least the draw. We're going to go ahead and activate our Heritage and set the Apocalypse we drew. And now you're going to see, I mentioned earlier in the actual like deck profile, so to speak, that true Draco Apocalypse, this card can be very, very nasty. And you're about to see why. It's going to have the attack and defense of all of our opponent's monsters, and now, like, they can't do anything against our Dreiath here. We drew Forbidden Chalice, so their Raijin would have been able to continuously stop our attacks, which would have been very annoying, but we're actually going to be able to Chalice and negate it and break through their board. And as you can see, even with one, you know, activation of Apocalypse, like, the rest of our opponent's board here is just completely neutralized. Or I guess, no, sorry, this is two. This is the second activation, but the point stands. Our opponent's board is completely neutralized, and yep, they've got to turn everything to defense mode and pass. So from this point on, we're in the advantageous position that this deck wants to be in, right? We've got our opponent's board on lockdown. We've got a whole bunch of back row. Our opponent is going to summon the invoked... Oh my god, these Yu-Gi-Oh card names, I swear to god. Agoides? Agades? Agades. Agades. Invoked A. No, this one's also A. Yeah, so this card is a bit annoying, but we're still able to respond with our Apocalypse, and we've also got the True King's Return. So this is like our ideal setup, right? Now we're able to, you know, have our opponent's board at any moment to completely neutralize any threats. We're able to continuously bring back our Dreiath III. So pretty much no matter what my opponent does to it, I'm going to be getting it back, you know, next turn anyway. Now here I am going to Apocalypse destroy another Apocalypse, so I can free up a spell trap zone, as well as destroy a monster on the field. As you can see from having our opponent's stats so much, they've got some monsters with some wonky numbers out here, until they all get destroyed by Torrential. That Torrential, I did kind of pull the trigger a little bit early on it. I probably could have waited for the actual fusion summon in order to play it, but it doesn't end up really mattering. I mean, I'm going to have the 2800 defense points anyway. As you can see, our opponent's extra deck is actually getting really low. They're going to go down to 6 cards here, and they're actually kind of at a position where they're running out of stuff. Like, you know, they summon the Macabre in defense mode because they don't really have anything, you know, they don't have any way to attack over this. They know I'm going to have its attack points. Also going to get rid of the back row, which turns out to be my opponent's graveyard will click infinite impermanence, so I think that was a decent hit. It could have negated my true Draco Apocalypse there, so definitely would not have wanted that to happen. At this point, our opponent's going to keep adding invocations, but now they're kind of like out of stuff to really fusion summon, and at that point they're going to concede. So that is an example of how this deck can kind of control and win against a, well, I'd call Shaddoll probably like a tier 2, maybe hovering somewhere between tier 2 and 3 deck, but yeah, you know, against a deck that was much, you know, it has a lot more ultra and super rares, I'll say, than our deck. I think we did pretty well. So that's pretty much all I've got for today's video. Like I said, that was just a fun little challenge. If you want to try this deck out, I'll go ahead and throw the list up once again. You can see I even went full like budget mode where I didn't use any of my board stuff either. But yeah, here is the list once again. Like I said, honestly, I think this deck could fairly easily carry you to gold. I don't think you would have too much trouble getting to gold with this deck. Gold to platinum would be hard, but I think doable. Plat 1 would definitely be a lot. It would be a huge challenge. If anyone who would do that, I would, like, you know, you would get a golf clap from me. That would be incredible. So yeah, if you want to try this out, feel free to. If you've got your own deck that's all rares and normals, or any other challenge kind of mode you want to see me do, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm always open for suggestions, as you guys know. But that's going to do it for today's video. This is Hexlex, signing out. Have a good day.